Hi guys. So, we've made the baseboard and got the trains running. So now I want to paint up the buildings and get a few of the hardscape parts built. This cottage is by MS Models and is a stunning resin print. And now I need to hack it into 2 parts. I've marked out where the cuts need to be, and so I can go at it with a Dremel like a bat out of hell. If that bat is carefully and thoughtfully departing said underworld. I'm cutting it inside the spray booth with the extractor on to remove the nasty stuff. Oh, and I'll drill out the chimney pots to add realism. And at this point I realise that instead of wasting the cut off, I can flip it round and use it as a low relief building as well. It's a Christmas miracle! The front of the cottage is going to be finished in a black and white look, so I'll start it off with a coat of primer. The front wall is getting a white acrylic primer through the airbrush for a nice smooth finish. And the 2 ends and the roof get a coat of black. The reason for this, even though the stonework will be a yellowish colour, is the black acts like a pre-shading layer, and hopefully this will become apparent further down the build. Whilst I'm not really ready to paint the other models that MS Models kindly sent over, such as Nantmore Station and the footbridge, I might as well coat them with the primer whilst the gun's out. As those dry, I want to make up the edging for the platform. I plan to use this embossed plasticard stonework, but it looks a little bit too large for 4mm, especially narrow gauge. So I've changed my mind and I'll use this one instead, which is kind of a random cobblestone type look. I've measured the depth of the platform as 3mm, so I've marked this out, and using a new blade I'll slice it off. It's important to do this in a number of passes, as if you force it with a single pass of the blade, it will warp the plastic and it'll bend. To attach it to the cork, I found the best thing to use is superglue, and I've added a thin bead to the rear of the plasticard. This is then pushed onto the cork with a suspiciously small ruler. Moving over to the stream, and this technique is repeated. The depth of this one is about 6mm, and due to the length it'll be made up of 2 parts. I'll hide the join with greenery or something. Okay, onto the slabs that cap the edge of the platform. So this is a technique that I use on my 5.5mm model of Pendray of the Tallaght, which you probably haven't seen yet thinking about it. Either way, it works well in 5.5mm, so I'm sure it'll work well in 4mm. I cut strips of plain plasticard. The strips are then cut down into separate slabs. Again, I don't really want to make these equal. A small narrow gauge station isn't exactly the Ritz, so I'd assume that time wouldn't be wasted making them all to match. To attach these on, I've run a strip of PVA along the cork, and the slabs are popped on one by one. I find this part oddly therapeutic. Even if the cat's walked off with half of them stuck to her tail. Like the walling, the capping stones are added in the same way along the stream side. I cut the walling for this a little bit too tall, so I've added little strips of plasticard onto the cork before attaching the stones on top so they sit level. To let these set, I've moved back over to painting the MS Models products. The white primer is pretty harsh in colour, so I'm adding a coat of off-white to it. Due to the detailing such as the downpipes, the front of this building needs to be sprayed at a few different angles to get full coverage. I've not done this sort of stonework before, and I originally planned to paint it in the same way as I would brickwork, as in individual stones picked out in various tones. But this didn't look right, so in the end I went for an all-over colour sprayed from above. Doing this leaves the black primer on the bottom half of the stones, giving a nice weighted shadow on every stone. With the layout's lighting hitting it from above, this should give a really nice realistic look to the walling. The bridge is slightly different style of stonework, but I'm going to paint it in the same way. Doing this will blend the architecture all over the layout together. it makes sense. Wow, this is like POV spraying in this shot. I painted the platform and the stream side walling in the same way. To emphasize the 3D finish of the stonework, I'm dry brushing the walls with a very light shade of cream. This actually also works to add a bit of that tonal variation that I couldn't be bothered to do earlier. In all honesty, it's down to the quality of the MS Models products that lets me cheat like this. On the other end of the quality spectrum, you get my NAF slabs that I've made myself. These will need to be painted individually to help the look. I went over each one with a thin coat of an ivory sand colour, and then a black wash, like you'd need to ask. Leaving that to dry, I've made a start on the details of the house. I didn't want to use a pure black for the paintwork, so I went for a very dark grey. All of this detail is slightly raised up from the front wall, so it's nice and easy to get a clean edge to the black. Which is lucky really, as trying to cover black areas with cream is a nightmare. I wanted the windows to look a bit different to the rest of the front, but any different colour would look a bit daft in my opinion, so I went over them with the white primer again. This gave just enough change to the cream to stand out as noticeably different. The same goes for the door, but as front doors are commonly painted as a statement piece, I went for a greenish colour. That reminds me, I haven't painted the knob yet. And I had a similar predicament painting the roof. Normal grey tiles wouldn't look right with the colours I've chosen for the stone, so instead I went for a pale brown colour. This was then dry brushed with a light antique white to age it down a tad. And remember that if I am unhappy with the roof, and I am a little bit, this will be a snowy winter scene, so unless the owners are growing a little forest in the attic, you shouldn't be able to see much of it. The chimney pots are also painted with a clay colour, and that's about it for the house for now. I then moved over to the bridge. Since the stonework was done at the same time as the house, I can move on to the woodwork. Again, this will mostly be covered by snow and frost, but either way, I've gone for an earth brown for the wood's base colour. I'm frantically painting here quite carelessly, but I've masked off the stonework, so it's justified. This is then dry brushed with a light antique white. Subscribers to the channel, and that should be all of you please, will recognise these colours from when I paint the wagons on the chorus project. Good times. Warmer times. At this point it was time to decide on the railway's flagship colour. A lot of railways use green, but since the Talat uses green and I modelled the TR a lot, I wanted something a bit different for this. And after browsing my paint library, I opted for a burgundy. This was then applied to the metalwork on the bridge sides. Whilst this is actually Nampmore Station, I'm not making it as a model of Nampmore, so I won't be using the nameplate that comes with the print. Like the bridge, this is getting sprayed with burgundy. This colour seems to show as a nice warm paintwork. So that was a happy accident on this build. I also kept the coat quite light to emphasise that. I wanted the look of a slightly unkept station, so decided to paint the paintwork up as unpainted wood. I don't know what it is, but I'm really loving the look of this station so far. Maybe it's because it's something I don't usually do, but it looks ace. I did think the roof being the same colour as the walls was a little bit much of the samey, so I masked it off to prepare to spray. Keeping with the unkept look, the roof will be rusting bare metal, so I started with a grey primer to reset the base. Then I whipped the airbrush out and went with a coat of gunmetal. This obviously has a very shiny finish, but I'll see to that. Isn't it great how much detail is on such a simple model? I'm going to be rusting up the roof, So the first coat will be an all-over wash. To make this wash, I'm using weathering powder mixed with water. I think this was called medium rust. It's quite a browny rust. This is then brushed onto the model with a wide flat brush, brushing top down. The wash will settle a bit as it dries, so it'll look less intense than it does here. I didn't want to throw the rest of the wash away, so I applied a bit to the rest of the station. The back's dry, so gives a good idea of the finish I'm going for. With the roof dry, I now pick out the rivets with a more concentrated wash of the same powder. This looks really nice as the wash runs down from the rivets. Finally, the whole roof is given a dusting of pure rust powder, and this softens the joint between the rust and roof. It also dulls the whole thing down a tad. No more shine for you, roof. As next week I'll be looking at putting down the actual scenics, I wanted to give the stream a head start. I sprayed the base of the river with a black primer, and then hand painted on a mix of greens, blues and browns. Then I made all that pointless by opting to use this product by AK called Puddles. I've used this in the past, but I didn't realise how much of a muddy colour it is when it's used in bulk like that. Ah well, it'll be covered by frost and ice. I needed to come up with a way to merge the two houses, and the picture that I took the inspiration for this build from has a double gate which goes through to the ford, but I didn't want that, so I went for a brick wall. I looked through a bag of miscellaneous bits that I've had from years back, and found some roof capping. One was curved and one was pointy. I went with pointy. This was then stuck on with a lick of liquid poly. To begin to paint this up, I started with a coat of red primer. And then I dry brushed the whole thing with the clay colour from the chimney. The wall is then detailed by picking out individual bricks with a variety of reds, browns, greys and creams. I find it difficult to paint random, but hopefully this looks random enough in your eyes. Once this is all dry, I'll add the mortar lines by using a weathering powder called Europe Earth by MIG Ammo. I found that the most effective way to add this is with your finger, as you can really push it into the cracks and lines. The wall is then wiped down with a dry cloth to remove the powder from the brick faces. One last job this week is to paint up the crew for Alice. As you can tell, these are modelling figures. And I didn't film the painting stage, as you've seen me do this a number of times on other videos. And if you haven't, go and find them. So let's get them fitted on the footplate. So this crew isn't actually designed for the open quarry Hunslet, so the chap with a hand up doesn't fit. But this was intentional. I wanted to model the driver like he's waving over at anyone on the platform, as he's feeling festive and kind because Christmas. A drop of superglue on the feet is enough to keep these guys in place. Isn't it funny how much of a change a crew can make to a logo? Okay, I'll pause there. That's most of the hardscaping done for now, which means I can get on to the fun stuff next week, and hopefully test out my fancy new snow products. Cheers.